In late 2019, the World Economic Forum, or WEF, co-hosted a global pandemic simulation known as Event 201 with the Johns Hopkins and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. A few months later, an actual pandemic began. In mid-2020, the WEF co-hosted a global cyber attack simulation with Sberbank, Russia's largest bank. Given the aftermath of Event 201, this has led to speculation that a cyber attack is around the corner. This video is the first of a two-part series about the WEF's cyber attack simulations, and today I'll explain what Cyber Polygon is and summarize what was planned, said, in the 2020 simulation. First up, Cyber Polygon is an annual cybersecurity event hosted by Byzone, a cybersecurity subsidiary of Sberbank. The first Cyber Polygon event took place in 2019, and it included simulations for DDoS, web application, and ransomware attacks. Unfortunately, the footage of Cyber Polygon 2019 has been removed from YouTube. Fortunately, it's still possible to download a PDF summary of the event. The summary reveals that there were a limited number of participants, with the only notable one being IBM. The WEF was not yet involved. That said, the WEF's cybersecurity initiatives predate Cyber Polygon by more than a year. The WEF announced the Global Center for Cybersecurity at its annual Davos conference in January 2018. Note that we summarized the WEF's 2023 Davos conference, and that video will be down in the description. Now, at some point in 2019 or 2020, the WEF partnered with Sberbank to organize Cyber Polygon 2020. Not surprisingly, Cyber Polygon 2020 was much larger than the 2019 edition. Over 120 organizations from 29 countries were involved, and the online event had over 5 million viewers from 57 countries. The website for Cyber Polygon 2020 explains that many of these 120 organizations chose to remain anonymous, but it reveals that lots of big names were involved. Besides Deutsche Bank and Ernst & Young, ICANN is noted as being one of the key partners. ICANN provides global internet infrastructure. Now, whereas the focus of Cyber Polygon 2019 was DDoS, web application, and ransomware attacks, the focus of Cyber Polygon 2020 was a so-called digital pandemic. This digital pandemic would affect everything from financial infrastructure to healthcare and would have a global impact. Now, the full Cyber Polygon 2020 stream is still available on Byzone's YouTube channel. I'll leave a link to the full stream in the description, but I will caution that it's almost 5 hours long. I'll also leave a link to an article from Unlimited Hangout which provides a detailed background on some of the speakers. So, Cyber Polygon 2020 began with opening remarks from Sberbank CEO Hermann Greff. Hermann explained that the speakers will be discussing, quote, the next pressing issue after the pandemic, which is, of course, a global cyber attack. He revealed that Interpol is also a key partner of Cyber Polygon. Hermann also revealed that WEF founder and chairman Klaus Schwab is personally involved with Cyber Polygon. For context, the WEF is an organization consisting of the world's most powerful individuals and institutions which come together each year to basically decide the future of the world without our input. More about the WEF in the description. Now, the first speaker was none other than Mikhail Mishustin, the Prime Minister of Russia, the second most powerful person in the country after President Vladimir Putin. Mikhail revealed that the post-pandemic recovery will focus on digitization, a process that was accelerated by pandemic restrictions. The second speaker was none other than Klaus. He revealed that he'd been working closely with Hermann, who you'll hopefully recall is the CEO of Sberbank. Klaus also said that he was pleased to have recently met with Putin, a meeting which apparently took place in St. Petersburg in November 2019. On that note, Putin is a so-called young global leader of the WEF. Young global leaders tend to become leaders of countries. Although the WEF removed Putin's profile from its website after Russia invaded Ukraine, the association has led to speculation that the war is being used as a pretext for a cyber attack. In any case, Klaus went on to explain that they need a, quote, great reset to bring everything together, aka to centralize control. He said that all WEF stakeholders must be mobilized, that everything must be digitized, and that the cyber attack will make the pandemic look like a small disturbance by comparison. Once Klaus was done, the mic was handed to Alexander Tushkanov, the host of the event. Alexander explained that a cyber attack simulation will be taking place in real time at the Sberbank headquarters during the event, with Byzone employees being hackers and participants being the cyber defenders. Alexander then said that it's been, quote, many years since the Fourth Industrial Revolution was announced by the WEF. He said that the WEF's initiative has resulted in two groups, those who support it and those who oppose it. He asked whether trust or fear will be the motivator for future cooperation. If that wasn't crazy enough, Alexander went as far as to ask whether it will take another crisis to unite the world once the pandemic is over. If you watched our video about how to survive the Great Reset, you'll know that the WEF seems to be keen to create crises for this exact purpose: centralized control. This ties into what was said by the third speaker, who was none other than Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the UK and a frequent contributor to the WEF's global agenda. He said that digitization will continue after the pandemic is over and that rolling out digital ID is the key to successful digitization. Tony went on to complain that governments weren't doing enough to crack down on privacy-preserving technologies and then warned that a, quote, globally impactful scandal is inevitable soon. He also said that the lack of cooperation in the pandemic response makes him concerned that digitization will fail. As I mentioned in that video about how to survive the Great Reset, you'll know that Klaus saw the pandemic as an opportunity to test the Great Reset philosophy. Klaus acknowledged that the WEF's top-down approach failed, which is why they're now focusing on young global leaders for a bottom-up approach. Speaking of which, the fourth speaker was Jeremy Jurgens, Chief Business Officer at the WEF. Jeremy explained that the speed of digitization will drive the kind of intimate public and private cooperation the WEF is looking for. Note that private and public integration are common in authoritarian regimes. Jeremy went on to explain that there will be another global crisis, that it will be worse, and that it will happen fast. He then revealed that the WEF has been working closely with intelligence agencies on cybersecurity related to energy infrastructure and asked what would happen if the energy grid went down. Not very subtle. Speculation aside, the fifth and sixth speakers were Sebastian Tolstoy, head of Ericsson's Russian operations, and Alexei Kornia, CEO of MTS, Russia's largest telecom company. The pair talked about the rollout of 5G and how its purpose is primarily for the operation of smart cities, not for civilian use. The seventh and eighth speakers were Nick Gowing, a former BBC News journalist, and Vladimir Pozner, a Russian journalist. Naturally, the pair talked about if fake news is the real digital pandemic. Nick began by slamming then US President Donald Trump for calling the mainstream media fake news. Vladimir continued by questioning whether it's a good thing that people have more access to information in the modern day and said that journalists used to be soldiers under the Soviet Union. Funnily enough, there was lots of disagreement, with Vladimir saying he wasn't enjoying the conversation. It seems Vladimir won the argument, though, because governments around the world are in the process of passing online censorship laws, some of which will go into force in the next few months. You can learn more about that using the link in the description. Anyways, the ninth speaker was Stéphane Duguin, CEO of the Cyberpeace Institute, and he didn't say anything worth noting. Heck, the CyberPolygon website didn't even bother to provide a description for his slot. I suppose that calling for peace doesn't quite jive with the WEF's obsession with all kinds of wars. It's a similar story for the 10th and 11th speakers, Danya Takar, Vice President of AEMA, and Wendy Whitmore, Vice President of IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence. As exciting as these titles sound, the conversation itself was pretty boring. TLDR, hackers are targeting infrastructure, and everyone is at risk. The 12th and 13th speakers were Jacqueline Curnow, who works in cybersecurity consulting at Ernst & Young, and Hector Rodriguez, a senior vice president at Visa. The topic of discussion was how to prepare for a cyber crisis, and what the panelists said was eye-opening to say the least. Jacqueline insisted that the next global crisis is imminent and said that the only solution is government regulation. Thankfully, Hector was not as convinced there will be another global crisis, but revealed that Visa already had a plan for dealing with the pandemic shortly before it began. I'm sure it's a coincidence. Now, the 14th and 15th speakers were Troels Erting, the chairman of the WEF's Center for Cybersecurity, and Jürgen Stock, the Secretary General of Interpol. For those unfamiliar, Interpol fights international crime with the help of law enforcement agencies from 195 countries and counting. While the Interpol Charter states that the organization is supposed to be politically neutral, in practice it appears to be very closely aligned with the WEF. This is because Troels revealed that he and Jürgen have been close friends for 30 years. Jürgen also said that Interpol and the WEF are aligned. Jürgen is particularly passionate about the WEF's fourth industrial revolution, which essentially involves the digitization of everything so that it can be closely monitored and controlled. To that end, Jürgen believes that software and hardware should have security by design features that allow for this control. The 16th speaker was Craig Jones, who also works at Interpol, specifically as the organization's cybercrime director. Craig's answers weren't nearly as revealing as the questions from Alexander, who asked about cyber attacks being executed in waves across multiple countries. Oddly specific. I should note that Alexander asked the last few speakers if cybercrime groups collaborate better than countries do. The answers were fairly mixed, but the consensus seemed to be that cybercrime groups are collaborating better than countries are, which makes sense given the tense political climate. The 17th speaker was Petr Gorodov, head of international legal cooperation at Russia's General Prosecutor's Office. Petr was watching the simulation at Sberbank headquarters, and Alexander asked him why cybercrime was on the rise in Russia and why only 8% of cybercrime cases are solved. Petr dodged the question and called on the United Nations to create a new convention focused on cybercrime. If I had my tinfoil hat, I'd tell you the lack of cybercrime prosecution in Russia is due to the fact that the Russian government is involved. Perhaps they're practicing for the WEF's cyber attack. Conspiracy theories aside, the 18th speaker was John Crane, Chief Security Officer of ICANN. Alexander asked him about the collaboration comparison between countries and cybercrime groups. John was the only speaker who claimed that the pandemic had increased the collaboration between countries. John also revealed that ICANN is keeping track of the registration of internet domain names around the world and their correlation to crime. As an international organization, ICANN is incapable of pursuing any enforcement action, but it has been forwarding this information to the appropriate authorities. Now, the final speaker was Stanislav Kuznetsov, chairman of Sberbank. He thanked the WEF, Interpol, and others for helping put together CyberPolygon 2020. He explained that the outcome of the ongoing cyber attack simulation would be published in a subsequent report. As I mentioned earlier, the attackers in the simulation were Bizone employees, and the defenders were the participants in the event. The identities of the defenders are not revealed in the simulation results. Now, the simulation results seem to suggest that the participants are unprepared for a cyber attack regardless of their industry. The results also specify that more than 20% of participants were incapable of identifying cyber threats before they occur. For what it's worth, financial institutions and IT companies performed the best across the three cyber attack scenarios. Note that the link to the results will be in the description. So, this brings me to the big question, and that's whether the WEF is in fact planning a global cyber attack to achieve even more control. I'll start by saying that a simulation of a Russian cybersecurity group pretending to attack dozens of Western corporations is suspicious no matter how you slice it. Executing a global cyber attack would also require the same kind of cooperation the WEF is trying to push with cyber defense simulations like Cyber Polygon. The catch is that the cooperation the WEF requires for a global cyber attack has been breaking down ever since the pandemic began. The conflicts over the distribution of things like medical equipment and medicine has led to a decline in trust between countries. This is probably why the host of Cyber Polygon felt compelled to ask the question of whether trust or fear would be the motivator for cooperation during the next crisis. Now, interestingly, the only person Alexander actually asked this question to was WEF Chief Business Officer Jeremy Jurgens. Jeremy admitted that fear achieves compliance, but cautioned that compliance is not the same as cooperation. Jeremy also admitted there is serious competition between countries. This begs the question of how the WEF will achieve cooperation without using fear in a way that won't be affected by the competition between countries. The answer seems to be a global crisis where no individual or institution is to blame, and this seems to be the crisis some of the speakers alluded to. The only problem with this kind of crisis is that the WEF wouldn't have nearly the same degree of control over its emergence and response like it did with the pandemic. Ideally, the WEF would have a way of secretly creating or exacerbating a crisis where it's impossible to detect their influence. This then begs the question of what kind of a global crisis would meet this criterion, and the answer seems to be a climate crisis. It just so happens that this is something the WEF and its allies have been talking a lot about lately, and it happens to be a crisis that they could secretly create or exacerbate. If you watched our video about weather modification, you'll know that it is a very real technology that's been around for almost 100 years. You'll also know that modern weather modification technologies are extremely powerful, and that it's reportedly impossible to detect when they're being used. A climate crisis made or made worse by this kind of undetectable weather modification would therefore be the perfect path to total control for the WEF. The only thing they would need to manage is the flow of information online, and that's something they're currently addressing with those online safety laws. The silver lining to this speculation is that the WEF doesn't only require the collective trust of countries to make this master plan work, it requires the trust of the average person. This trust has been broken beyond repair, and what's left of it is being pounded into dust by the WEF's ever more dystopian plans. Does this mean that a cyber attack is off the table? Not exactly. Remember, this is part 1 of a 2-part series. In part 2, I'll be summarizing what was said at Cyber Polygon 2021 and looking at how the Ukraine war has affected the WEF's cyber plans. So be sure to subscribe and ping that notification bell so you don't miss it.